The paradox is not the darkness. The paradox is the light. We have learned to fear the dark, to associate it with danger, with the unknown, with what we cannot control. And so we build corridors of light. We construct elaborate, well-lit passages toward the future, lining the walls with certainties, illuminating every corner with the warm glow of what we believe will happen, what we believe others will do, what we believe we deserve. We walk these corridors with confidence, sometimes with joy, occasionally with the particular kind of pride that comes from believing we have finally understood how things work. And then we open the door. What strikes us first is not the disappointment itself. It is the speed of the transition. One moment, light, warmth, the comfortable hum of expectation fulfilled in advance. The next, darkness, silence, the disorienting sensation of reaching for a wall that isn't there. The door closes. We cannot go back, and we stand in the dark room of what actually happened, trying to remember how the corridor we built looked so certain, so obvious, so inevitable. This is not a marginal experience. It is not the occasional failure of optimism or the predictable consequence of naivety. It is one of the central structuring experiences of human consciousness, so central that every major philosophical tradition has had to develop a response to it, and none of those responses has ever been entirely satisfying. The Stoics were the most systematic in their approach. Marcus Aurelius, writing in the 2nd century CE in private notebooks never intended for publication, developed what amounts to a daily practice of corridor demolition. Before each day began, he would remind himself, with almost obsessive repetition, that people would be difficult, that circumstances would resist his intentions, that his body would eventually fail, that everything he valued could be taken from him without warning. This was not depression. It was not resignation. It was a deliberate philosophical technology designed to prevent the construction of illuminated corridors in the first place. The most powerful man in the Western world spent his mornings systematically dismantling his own expectations. Epictetus, who had been a slave and therefore knew something about the gap between what one expects and what one receives, articulated the underlying principle with devastating economy. There is what depends on us, and there is what does not. Everything that depends on us can be cultivated and refined. Everything that does not depend on us should be released from the grip of expectation entirely. The problem, of course, is that we are constitutionally unable to determine in advance which category a given thing falls into. We believe our relationships depend on us until they don't. We believe our health depends on us until it doesn't. We believe our work depends on us until the world decides otherwise. The Stoic discipline is not a solution to this problem. It is a way of living inside it, without being destroyed by it. But the Stoics, for all their precision, were operating at the level of adult consciousness, at the level of the rational agent who can, in principle, choose his responses to events. What they did not adequately account for is the degree to which the problem of expectation is built into us, far below the level of rational choice, in the earliest experiences of being alive. Winnicott understood this. The infant who cries and is held reliably, warmly, sufficiently, learns something about the world that no philosophy can later fully undo, that expectation works, that the universe responds, that reaching out produces contact. This is the foundation of what psychologists call secure attachment, and it is the foundation of hope in its most basic form. But the infant who cries and is met with inconsistency, held sometimes with suffocating intensity, abandoned at others without warning, learns something different and darker, that expectation is dangerous, that the corridor cannot be trusted, that the light might go out at any moment. This infant becomes the adult who builds illuminated corridors with desperate urgency, who invests in certainty with the ferocity of someone who has known what it is to have certainty fail. The corridor is not optimism, it is armor. And armor by definition is a response to anticipated attack. Freud mapped this territory from a different angle. What he called idealization, the investment of the beloved object with qualities it does not possess, is not, as it is sometimes described, a simple cognitive error. It is a psychic necessity, driven by the magnitude of desire itself. We need the object to be sufficient to the desire. We need the person, the project, the idea, the future to be large enough to fill the space that longing has carved out inside us, and so we make them larger than they are. We construct them in the image of what we need, rather than what they are. The illuminated corridor is not a picture of the future. It is a picture of the desire that is looking for a future to inhabit. When the room turns dark, What dies is not simply the expectation. What dies is the version of ourselves that had organized around it. This is why disappointment at its most serious is not merely painful, it is disorienting. We do not know who we are without the expectation that had been structuring our sense of forward motion. We had been, in some fundamental sense, the person who was going somewhere specific. Now we are in the dark, and the specific somewhere has dissolved, and we must begin the slow, disorienting work of finding out what remains when the image we had invested in is gone. Lacan pushed this further than anyone else was willing to go. For him, the structure of desire is such that the object is always, necessarily beyond reach, not because real objects are uniformly disappointing, but because what desire is actually seeking was never any specific object in the first place. Desire is the movement itself, not the destination. The corridor does not lead to a room because the corridor is the point. We build illuminated passages toward futures that, if we ever actually arrived in them, would immediately generate new corridors leading toward new futures. The disappointment is not a malfunction of the system, it is how the system works. We are not beings who expect and are sometimes disappointed. We are beings for whom expectation and disappointment are the fundamental rhythm of psychic life. This is where Nietzsche becomes indispensable, not as a solution, but as a reframing that makes it possible to live without being crushed by the rhythm Lacan describes. Nietzsche's concept of amor fati, love of fate, is not passive acceptance of whatever happens. It is something more demanding and more strange, the active embrace of one's life as it actually is, including the parts that arrived as disappointment rather than as fulfillment, the dark rooms as well as the illuminated corridors. The question Nietzsche is really asking is, can you love the whole of it, not despite the darkness but including it? Can you look at the gap between what you expected and what arrived, and find in that gap not just loss, but something that was genuinely yours, an experience that, however painful, was part of the specific shape of your particular existence? Most of us cannot. Most of the time, we do what Nietzsche called ressentiment. We turn our disappointment outward. We locate the failure in the object rather than in the expectation. We build a case against the world for not being what we needed it to be. This is psychically understandable and philosophically disastrous. It keeps us in the dark room, rearranging the furniture of our grievances, unable to open the door because opening the door would require acknowledging that we built the corridor ourselves. There is a distinction that cuts through all of this with unusual clarity, and it comes not from a philosopher known for cutting clarity, but from Gabriel Marcel, a French thinker whose work remains largely unknown outside specialist circles. Marcel distinguished between hope and expectation, with a precision that neither the Stoics nor the psychoanalysts quite managed. Expectation, for Marcel, is always directed at a specific outcome. It has an object, a timeline, a criterion for success or failure. Hope, by contrast, is directed not at an outcome, but at a person or a situation in their openness. It holds the future lightly, allows for forms of fulfillment that were not anticipated, remains alive even when the specific thing hoped for does not arrive. Expectation says, this must happen in this way, by this time. Hope says, something is possible here, and I am open to what form it takes. The Buddhist concept of upekkha, usually translated as equanimity, though the translation loses something, points toward the same territory from a very different direction. Equanimity is not indifference. It is not the withdrawal of investment or the protection of the self through non-attachment in any simple sense. It is rather the capacity to be fully present in experience, including experiences of loss, disappointment, and the dark room, without being defined by them, without organizing one's entire sense of self around their resolution. The Zen teacher Shunryu Suzuki put it simply, in the beginner's mind there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. Expectation is the mind of the expert. It has already decided what is possible. Hope is the mind of the beginner. None of this makes the darkroom comfortable. None of it makes the transition from the illuminated corridor to the darkness less disorienting. What it offers is something more modest and more useful, a way of understanding the experience that does not require us to conclude either that we were foolish to have built the corridor or that the world is at fault for not maintaining it. The corridor was real. The light was real. The desire that generated both was real and valuable and worth honoring. And the darkroom, for all its difficulty, is also real, and also in ways that take time to become visible. Worth honoring. We will keep building corridors. We are that kind of creature, forward-leaning, expectant, constitutionally unable to approach the future without imagining it first. This is not a flaw to be corrected. It is the condition of being human, with all the beauty and the vulnerability that condition entails. But perhaps with philosophy, with attention, with the slow accumulation of experience that teaches us something about the relationship between the light we project and the darkness that waits, we can learn to carry something into the room with us. Not enough light to see everything, just enough to find the door on the other side. To read more about philosophy, art, cinema, and progressive rock, visit Caixa Preta, link in the comments.